Hi everyone, I'm Catherine. I'm the researcher at the Crypto Research and Design Lab, and I'm your host for the next several hours of programming. The reason we're here is for the Web3-a-thon track of programming, which is a 3-month hackathon focused on 5 different hyperlocal themes. And this first theme is about generational wealth. And so I'm so excited to bring Tricia Wang onto the stage to moderate this panel. Tricia is the co-founder and director of CRADL. And the reason I'm really excited to have her moderate this panel is twofold. The first is her experience in tech is vast. She started selling some of the earliest text messaging technology, and she's been following the importance of data ethics and personal autonomy with data for the last several years, several decades. And the thing that's really most exciting is for financial health and for generational wealth, some of Tricia's previous work has to do with building out the financial system in Peru and bringing rural entrepreneurs into the financial system. And what she found is that it's not going to work for them because they have really different needs than the folks that banks are already addressing. So she takes a really culturally aware approach to fighting for equity and to helping people build generational wealth through her work. So please welcome Tricia Wang to the stage.
Is my mic on? I want to welcome, thank you, Catherine. Oh my God, it's day 2 of Web3-a-thon. So I love to bring up my amazing panelists here. We have Henry from the New Mexico Community Capital Fund. Hello, Henry.
Hello,
and we
hello.
also have Isaiah Jackson, who we were just on the panel on the main stage together, so we are like really sustaining the energy.
Oh yeah.
And we also have here Robbie Greenfield from, I have to say it's Umoja Lab, so I speak Spanish, so I'm always like Umoja, and you're like, no, it's Umoja. So we are here to talk about generational wealth. This is one of the 5 challenge areas of the Web3-a-thon. Our whole theme is hyperlocal, but when you submit as a team, how many people are entering into the Web3-a-thon? Raise your hands. How many teams are out there? Yes? I just wanted to see more hands, really? Okay. So by the end of this session, at least I'm going to try and convince you that perhaps that generational wealth is one of the challenge areas you want to enter in. And remember, no code is needed for the first stage of submission, which is why we brought up these 3 amazing leaders from their communities to talk about the process that they went through to really getting into Web3, and in particular, why they are so focused on building generational wealth. So I'm going to just do a quick introduction, which is Henry here. You have started in Digiverse, and one of our first conversations, you were like, yes, like us, indigenous people, we've always been in the multiverse. We've been, living on multiple layers. Like we've always known that the physical layer was just one layer. So it was an incredible conversation where you told me about how, you started looking at the cannabis industry. And then Isaiah, when we first had, I was like, oh my God, I'm watching you for years on, YouTube, one of the longest running YouTube shows. And here you are, second publication of Bitcoin and Black America, and you're going to be going on tour all over the world, and also now in Africa, all over, and you've been connecting with the Africa Blockchain Institute people. And then, Robbie Greenfield, if there's someone who's truly paved the way for doing social impact work in Web3, before it was even called Web3, it is truly Robbie Greenfield, who is now focusing on DeFi and emerging markets, and you are the founder and the CEO of Umoja Labs, and prior, you were also the founder of Consensus Impact Lab, social impact. So way before. So I want to start us off with a question. And we're going to keep this fast paced because we have 20 minutes on the clock and we're going to be on time, which is what is generational wealth to each of you? And we're going to interrupt each other because it's we're having drinks or having coffee, whatever. What is generational wealth to you all? And I'm going to start first with Robbie.
Yeah, this is an excellent question. Generational wealth, I can speak up, it's all right. Generational wealth, to me is enabling an entire lineage the ability to choose how they want to affect the world. Okay. Right? And I say that because oftentimes, especially from the Black community, when you matriculate from college or wherever you're coming from, you have to go into working regardless if you're passionate about it or whether you want to do it or not, and there's no choice in that pursuit of what that career is going to be. And there are a lot of constraints as to how you continue to live your life in terms of what you invest in, where you live, et cetera. And so really giving an entire lineage, an entire family, the ability to choose how they want to impact the world freely without the debt or constraints that might be attached to them because they did not have the capital to do
Well,
so.
I think we can all agree on that. Does anyone else have anything else to add, or you're like? Exactly.
Oh yeah. Well, I do want to throw in ownership. I think that's the biggest hurdle for people when they talk about generational wealth. You can have things while you're alive. If you can't pass it down, you don't own shit. There is no wealth to be passed down. So generational wealth starts with ownership, and then also the education to use it. So even if you do have a dumbass grandkid that wants to get rid of it, he can't do it because you have things in place to make sure that they don't mess up what you've built. So ownership.
To all dumbass grandkids.
Yeah, we all. I mean, every rich person or person that makes it has somebody in their lineage that can throw it away.
Screw it all up.
But this industry, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This industry gets it, so they have the education, so they don't.
I'm going to come back to you and ask you how blockchain is going to prevent some dumbass kids from fucking up all their generational wealth.
We all got them.
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and just kind of redefine wealth from an indigenous perspective, right? It's really about how much we give back, not how much we hoard. It's about health, right? I don't have generational wealth because my dad died at 50. My grandfather died at 50, right? Like, that's serious issues that we're facing in Native America. So we have to start from the scratch of like, how are we first gonna survive? How are we gonna really give back to our community? And thirdly, I wanna bring spirit into this, right? am I the first person who's talking about spirituality and Tao? Like, right? I'm not, I'm glad. And that's that power of that, right? Is like, that's the generational wealth that I'm talking about, right? That true technology, that connection to our ancestors. I'm wearing it right now in my shirt. This is my wealth. This is where I come from. This is my floral woodland design. This is my batok from my Filipino side. This is where I come from. That's my generational wealth. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, I'm curious then, like, what does blockchain have to do with any of this stuff that we're talking about? Because generational wealth has always been an issue, right, for hundreds of years. But what's the real opportunity for, now we're talking about words like DeFi and NFTs and blockchain and Bitcoin. All three of you come at this from different perspectives. So I'm curious, like, what does that have anything to do with what we're talking about here at all?
I would say, it's really systematically capturing frameworks of value. And what I mean by that is that, and to your point, right, the only type of value, blockchain doesn't capture just monetary value in the form of cryptocurrencies. It can capture value in the form of impact, in the form of offsets, in the form of reputation. But the issue is that in order to ensure that you have a system that sustains generational wealth for typically underrepresented communities, you need to make sure that those frameworks, right, for that system have removed as many biases as possible.
What do you mean by a framework? Can you make it like a bit tangible?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a lot of different frameworks in terms of how value is shared. I think one that isn't as common in the United States or in the West more generally, but is very common when you go onto the continent for Africa, is group savings and group lending, right? That is a framework to take a vulnerable community who is resource poor, right, and enable them to access financial services that they wouldn't otherwise have access to because they can't be banked, or maybe they can't even use mobile money because there are paywalls in mobile money.
And that happens everywhere. It's not just Africa. It's like we study that in Peru. Lawrence Rode, our co-founder CRADL, studies that in Myanmar, right?
Yeah.
But we forget that these other forms and frameworks and practices exist.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and I would say transparency we have to put in there because, especially in my own community, we have IP that's been stolen, you have homes, you have land that's been stolen, and because it wasn't on the blockchain where we could verify it and everyone could see it, you could basically burn the papers or get rid of the records, and then here you are 3 generations later and you don't have generational wealth. So that transparency on the blockchain is important, and long term, your kids down the road, even the dumbass grandkid, you can see on the blockchain that this is what we owned and this is how we built it. So I think that's all important as well, and that's why blockchain is needed.
Yeah, I just agree with everything that you're saying, and even these types of events, like I'm learning so much just from these two, right? And I just want to do, like, we did a land acknowledgement. I want to do a technology acknowledgement. Blockchain is an indigenous technology, right? We know that. Let's give it up. Come on. The island of Yappies, right? This is the history. We have to know that history.
Well, but you got to break it down. Like, not everyone understood what you just said. So break it down, because not also everyone, is from the U.S. So we have
Gotcha.
around the world. What do you mean by, like, big blockchain is an
The
indigenous
history of legends.
technology. Like, break it down.
So back in the day, we didn't have written languages, right? We had physical objects, and we had this big stone, right, on the island of Yap, and that's how they recorded transactions amongst community members. The same wampum shell, right, was how the Constitution was built of the U.S., right? So this is the type of knowledge and history that we have to educate, and that's why I believe in this technology, because it's inherently based in our culture. Right. So everything they're talking about, that's why I'm all about it, because that's what's going to create that generational wealth.
What is it about the distributed nature of the technology now, a blockchain, that will enable some of the things that we're talking about? Because I want to get a bit practical, because we have builders in the audience who are technical and non-technical. So if we can understand, yes, spiritually and like historically, we get that the blockchain is not totally something new. We've had various forms of artifacts and distributed ledgers, but now it's just digital. But practically, like as a builder, like Robbie, what are you doing on the blockchain to enable generational wealth?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have two answers for this. I'm going to go the protocol route because I'm a nerd first. But you take all of these historic artifacts, these historic patterns of how communities have stored, shared, and distributed wealth more generally, whether it be savings and lending. Those are generally the fundamental financial principles of most communities. It allows those type of social trust-built systems to scale. Right, and so the context or the example that I would use in a protocol situation is for lending groups. And for those who are unfamiliar with lending groups, we all got $10. We put $10 into the bucket, and one of us can take out a loan of $200 or $300, right? And then we make payments for the rest of those months, and then the next person gets to go, and then the next person gets to go. And this is how we can lend from each other. And of course, if any of us misses one of our payments, we know that person's like, yo, Rob, you need to submit your payment, man. Like, I want all my money back from this, right? And so, but this can only, right now, this can only sustain itself within villages of people who know each other.
Face to face, very physical.
Yes. Right. And so when you map that onto a protocol that can exist on a blockchain that can scale, you can start to enable communities to create group saving models or group lending models across multiple continents of similar backgrounds. Smallholder farmers is a huge one. And so this is something that Umoja Labs is looking into. But even beyond that, one of the other things from a transparency perspective is making sure that the solutions that we use to provide someone else value, so in the context of humanitarian aid, being able to do that transparently and enabling that person to be able to on and off ramp to the current accounts that they have, like mobile money. And so it takes very small steps. What might start with payments, right, just to understand how can we reliably provide accessible technology for people to use this in the forefront, then translates into things that become a lot more complex, like savings and like and loans. So those are just two examples of how we can actually materialize and leverage the technology in underrepresented communities.
But DeFi is also seen as something that's been quite exploitive.
Yes. Yeah.
So what are you doing that's different?
Yes.
Because this is very important for all the builders out there. If you're going to be working in DeFi, we're talking about money and currency and people's livelihoods. What's going to be different about what you're doing at Umoja Labs, like as advice to all the builders out there?
The biggest thing is that you cannot have inflationary flywheels. And
break it down.
Yeah. So I told y'all earlier, I'm going to really go in on yield. We see these products out there that promise 30 to 40% APY.
It ain't happening.
Not a thing. It's not a thing. It's not a thing. They especially. And again, this is not all the algo stablecoins. I think some of them, are doing an okay job. But the issue is that me promising you 30% APY when I'm just minting tokens is not a sustainable model. There's a cost of acquisition for every token that I give you, right? And that cost is inflation. And so what happens is you are putting out there an economic system that is going to fail, and you're putting all the people who use that currency as a store of value at great risk. And this happened with UST. What people don't talk about, and you brought this earlier on the main stage, is that UST was deployed in African communities, like smallholder farmer communities, as a test. And it failed, right?
There are some chains doing it right now, and we're going to be researching that at CRADL because it's highly exploitive.
Yes, and so you need to have, when you go into any type of community, not just underserved communities, any type of community, because money is money, and money is important to people to function. You need to be able to have a stablecoin analysis in terms of, okay, what form of value are you using? If that's USDC because the enterprises behind what that is are more trustworthy and there's collateral not only in terms of liquidity on chain, but liquidity in the reputation of those organizations, then maybe that's something that you should start with. Or if that's DAI because there's a certain level of transparency, but know that every stablecoin has its risk. And USDC does as well, right? We're trusting that those institutions have money in the bank to back it. And so that's the first thing, is that we have a very, very critical stablecoin analysis in terms of what we allow on the protocols, what we allow in our products. But then also you need to have certain guarantees. You need to know that if you have 1,000 wallet holders for your wallet and they're using a stablecoin that might not necessarily be reliable, you need to provide them the guarantee that if that becomes depegged, their money is guaranteed. That you are going to cash them out to an off-ramp and they're going to be fine. And that's something that you have to take on as a responsibility because you want to grow your own company.
So what's your guarantee?
Our guarantee is that if it's depegged, your money's still guaranteed.
Oof.
And so those are two things. But then the second thing is you need to take steps to get certain things right. Payments in last mile environments is very difficult with cryptocurrency. Once you overcome that hurdle and allow people just to say, hey, this is 1,000 times less expensive than mobile money transfers. If you can achieve that, then you can move to the next step, which is savings and lending, which is 1,000 times more complex.
I mean, I'm curious. Yeah. Oh, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was going to say, you said practical use cases for Web3. So right now in Miami, we have the Miami Bitcoin Summer Camp, as well as the Academy. And the main thing we're looking at is...
Yes, that you're making, that
yes.
this is yours.
Yes,
you're
absolutely.
one of the designers of this.
Yep, and the main thing is creating learn-to-earn Web3 programs and the gamification of education. The ultimate goal is to disintermediate public schools as much as possible, simply because they haven't worked and they're not working currently the way they should. And I'm not saying we have to get rid of them, but you need another option. And
especially because universities and schooling has been a way to build generational wealth.
Usually,
yeah. Communities are excluded. So I think it's crazy what you're saying. I actually was like, wait, what? You're getting rid of schools?
Yeah. Well, my mother was a teacher for 30 years, grandmother was a teacher for 40. I taught high school, and I've seen through the years how much public school has left out of education. When in reality, I know 15-year-olds that 2 or 3 years, they could be working in the industry using gamification of education. So actual practical use cases is the next generation. We're talking about generational wealth. The next generation, they're not going to learn the same way we did. So we have to start building that now and stop relying on whatever local government or whoever officials that may suck at their job. Then do it yourself.
So there are a few people, yes. There are a few people who I spoke to in the audience. Like I remember speaking to someone named Mosa who is building a learn to earn. You know, he's like an educator from Atlanta, and he's telling me like, you know, we need to start educating people in Web3 in simple ways. And you're an educator at heart, you know. So I'm curious, like, what's your advice for people who are going to create educational products for Web3-a-thon as they're building? Like, what can you tell us a bit about what you're doing in Miami and, you know, some advice on practical stuff?
The main thing is meet them where they are. No matter who I deal with, meet them where they are. So if you look at what kids do today, they all play video games. They're all used to it. They're all pretty much on the internet since birth. I mean, every kid born now has a camera in his face as soon as they're born, iPad at 2 years old. So meet them where they are and have the ability for them to learn the same things they would sitting in a classroom, sitting at home or on their phone, and able to earn from it. Because I remember when I was in school, there were some kids, if you got A's, your parents give you $5, or if you got B's, they give you $3. In reality, when you reward people as an adult for your job, that's actually teaching them as a child. You get rewarded for good behavior as well as learning. So I think that's a perfect synergy to be able to get paid to learn, because you're going to get paid for the things you know later. So it's just a good start. So practically, if you're building that, the gamification and building in the earning model for students that they can either use, you know, early or that they can use once they turn 18.
But where does the money come from for learn to earn, like practically speaking?
Oh yeah, that's the good thing about education grants and scholarships, and as well as people in the local community. If you actually want to support education, you should be supporting it yourself and not relying on whatever tax base, because we see what happens. You have schools that failed. A lot of communities I was in, they failed because the tax base wasn't high enough.
So one of the themes for our hackathon, I mean, the whole overarching theme is hyper-local. So what a way, if like a builder wanted to create a learn-to-earn kind of model, should they partner with a local organization to get grants? Even if it's like $100 as an experiment for the Web3-a-thon, can they do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And you can partner with local community banks, or you can partner with local companies that need talent. And if you say, hey, you need to know this to work here. We have this where we can teach students where they can come straight out of high school doing that. That's where you can get the money from.
Yeah. Can I share as a fellow past high school teacher as well? Yeah, I was a high school teacher before my job, and really what we do is we're a nonprofit, so we act as a fiscal sponsor for all our Native American entrepreneurs because they have social enterprises, and we just are able to talk about that and really give them, like, we're literally giving people their first laptop. We literally just got access to the internet during the pandemic, a lot of our communities. So the digital divide is real in New Mexico, and we have to be able to provide the hardware. We give every seed funds to all of our participants, no matter what they do, from $1,200 all the way to $15,000, no questions asked. When we create our loan funds, we have a 50% repayment loan, right? So that if something like that happens, we know that we got their back, and we even forgive loans. So now looking in Web3, we know we have to deploy $10 million in the next 5 years. Is there solutions that we could find to make it faster? Because I'll tell you right now, tribes, their biggest pain point is checks, believe it or not, right? Is that antiquated system of how do we get this money to our people? And the most important part is how do we create the shared governance? Because there was a structure put in place for us that was very hierarchical, and it's how we lost all of our land. It's how we lost all of our resources. So this idea that we could have people be at that power and make those decisions, I think that's the most powerful, reason why we're looking into Web3 and why we're creating these solutions.
Where did the $10 million come from that you just threw out there? You talked about $100. Where did this money come from?
Luna airdrop.
I'll tell you, disgruntled ex-wives of billionaires. Melinda Gates and Mackenzie Scott.
Is that the new hyperlocal plan advice for all these builders?
Yeah, make relations, put your story out there, you never know who's in the audience, and that's really what we found. We never thought that could be an opportunity, but we put it out there and we came up with a new worldview, and that's what's missing, right? We're still replicating the same worldview that's based in consumerism and capitalism and building money and getting as much money as possible. Well, we're going to see the same thing happen over and over again.
Plus a million.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, when we were talking, Henry, you said something that just shook me, where you're like, we're using the same consciousness to build Web3 as we did for building Web 2. Like, it was your words who said that.
And the beauty of it, though, is that now we're talking about multiple dimensions, which is stuff that we've already been talking about. We're talking about different ways of exchanging bartership, which we've already been doing. Decentralized autonomous organizations. That sounds like tribes to me. You know what I'm talking about? Like, that was our original structure. Yet I'm the only Native American here with Palm out of 15,000 people, right?
Oh, no, I'm Native American too.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, it makes sense. That's why you're a leader.
So,
that's why you're a leader.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. And it's no cell phone service out there, so as you said.
No cell phone. Actually, can we just talk about that for a second? Yeah. 2 more minutes. But a digital divide is so important because with the blockchain, you actually need internet infrastructure to be able to transact. You need cell phone infrastructure. And let's think about this for a second. And people who are building in rural communities, how do we actually think about the blockchain when that's not even in place? And Robbie, you've been building in places like this. What do you see here?
Well, I was going to say mobile hotspots, satellite technology, and then near field communication with Bluetooth. Those are the top 3 I would say we can use. But also, too, when the local community sees how important it is, they will push to get these things. It's not important to them now because they live life just fine without it until it becomes a must need. I think that starts there, and then we have the technology to build from there.
And I would have certainly NFCs. I mean, even in the context of NFC cards. So, we're coming in and we're scanning, our badges, right? That same technology in many ways can be used even in completely, non-internet environments. In environments with no internet, they can still be used. And there's a lot of, clever patterns, that have been developed in other sectors to enable the persistence of transactions, et cetera. And then when internet becomes available to persist them. But additionally,
and you worked in harsh environments, which you're going to talk about in the panel on disaster response and relief afterwards. So you're going to talk about what you've been building in places where there's nothing. Right? In terms of internet infrastructure.
Yes, absolutely. And I think another thing is USSD. So USSD is a communications protocol that every telecommunications network in the world supports. It's not something that is typically used in the West, but allows someone to
effectively interact with a text-based application that can be supported by the data persisted on that telecommunications network. And the reason why it's important is imagine having a freely accessible digital wallet that you can use on a feature phone or on a smartphone. And that's something that can be globally accessible today. But the issue is that certain telcos allow them, other ones don't. You see actually the most coordination in Africa, right? And that's why you see the persistence of mobile money across communities who otherwise wouldn't have access to any type of financial technologies whatsoever. And so these things, to the earlier point, need to be prioritized, and we can't think of everything in the form of an iOS application.
Well, I want to end on one last question. We are at time, but I want, for all the builders who are out there, and who's actually on this panel, who's joining the Web3-a-thon? You have a team, right? Yes. Okay. So, what is your one advice for builders for what product or improvement is needed for building generational wealth? What would be your advice be?
Can I add to that? Because that was a challenge around internet, is we need the right amount of time to talk about the ethical, cultural impacts of all of this before we can even start building. And we need those developers there at the forefront of listening to the community. Because I could talk about being in a hackathon, but I got to go back to my community and say, hey, are you all, let's talk about this. What does this mean for ourselves? What does this mean for 7 generations in the future? That's the burden that we have to, that's the burden that I carry, right, about thinking about.
That's why we have 6 weeks for you to submit an idea. You're not forced to build. Yeah. You actually have to understand.
Yeah. Can you ask the question one more time?
What advice do you have for builders who want to work on generational wealth? And I also lobbed on 2 questions, which is also around, if there's anything around digital divide that you want to add, that would be incredible too.
So just technical infrastructure in places where they have the digital divide, focus on that, because the world is very large. It's not just New York, LA, and a couple of the big cities. It's a lot of open land that need that infrastructure. So that's an industry within itself. And then the energy industry, focusing on that, being able to use solar power and things like that long term.
Environmental well-being panel.
Oh yeah,
that's right.
You need it. You can get some good carbon credits from that.
Yeah, yeah. And I would say, learn from your ancestors in terms of the models that already exist. There's very few new things in the world, and it's honestly just taking those models, injecting ethics in terms of the policies that are going to be hard set, and then going to build. I agree. It's research first, and that's not just research online. That's research on the ground, talking to people in real life. Doing that first. Focus on blockchain later. Right. That will find its time within your architecture later on.
On that note, I'm going to wrap this up by saying that's incredible, Robbie, that you said focus on blockchain later at a crypto conference and a Web3-a-thon that we're being asked to build on the blockchain. Your advice is focus on the blockchain later. You also said that it's actually incredibly important to do critical stablecoin analysis. If you're going to do anything around that, you have to think about guarantees. And then you also gave really great advice about saying, hey, you have to think about USSD as a technology to actually work with. And Isaiah, you really gave great advice on saying meet them where it's at. As a hyperlocal builder, you can be looking at things at gaming. You're, as a high school teacher, you know what your students need. So meet them where it's at. Don't think that your passion for gaming is not helpful here. Whatever you do, if you're into fashion, if you're into understanding the history of gaming, you belong here. And you also said, Henry, you also talked about how we have to avoid the kind of hierarchies that got us into the same problems right here that we're in right now. So with that, this is a great message to all the builders for the next few weeks, is that you can listen to this panel again, and we're going to have AMAs where we could talk more about the actual practicalities of building around this challenge of generational wealth. Thank you so much, and find them on Twitter and ask them questions.
Thank you so much.